Today I want to talk to you about a couple things, but I want to talk to you about the carnal mind versus the spiritual mind. And we're going to go back to Mark chapter 5 where we were studying, we're going verse by verse, chapter by chapter, looking at Mark chapter 5. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. But before we go back to Mark chapter 5, I want to jump over to forward to Romans chapter 8, and just to see what the scriptures say, because we're going to tie this into where we're going in Mark chapter 5. So Romans chapter 8, verses 5 through 9. He said, "Those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh. But those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be. So then, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. But you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God dwells in you." And I want to stop there. So we have this kind of a dichotomy where he talks about the carnal mind and the spiritual mind. He said to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. And so he makes a statement here. He said, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Now, before I get to that, now when we think about living in the flesh or walking after the flesh or having a carnal mind, perhaps your mind goes to living a lifestyle of sin or living in rebellion against God or doing acts of wickedness, having that sinful lifestyle as we shared, and all that. Although that is true, that those things are living and walking after the flesh, more specifically, is talking about living a faithless life. The carnal mind is a mind that is absent of faith. By definition, it's a lack of faith. Again, Romans chapter 8, verse 8, we just read it to you. He said, those who are in the flesh, or having the carnal mind, they're synonymous. He said, cannot please God. When we look over at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, I'm just going to touch on this. It says, without faith, it is impossible to please him. So if we connect these two thoughts together, those who are in the flesh or those who have a carnal mind cannot please God. There's a hindrance. Those in the flesh cannot. It's an impossibility to please God. And then Hebrews chapter 11, he said, without faith, it is impossible to please him. So that is the single factor that it takes to please God in all things, is to have faith. So what is the carnal mind? The carnal mind is a mind that doesn't include God in the equation, that separates God from the situation. It's trying to figure out things on our own wisdom, our own experience, our own knowledge, our own thinking. And God has designed us. He's given us intelligence. He's given us minds. He's given us ways to navigate in this world. But when it comes to the spiritual things, where a spiritual mind is required, it requires faith. And the carnal mind doesn't believe. The carnal mind sets aside faith. and has to figure it out. Says things like we touched on when we read, when we first started today, that I read to you out of the book of John. Part of that was Thomas, the account with Thomas, where he said, except I believe, or except I see the prints of the nails in his hands and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. That's the carnal mind. The carnal mind requires sight, requires proof. Show me. God, why doesn't God stick his head out of heaven and say, I am God? He doesn't need to do that to prove himself. The carnal mind requires that. Therefore, the carnal mind, the Bible says, is enmity against God. What is the carnal mind? It leaves God out of the equation. The carnal mind leans on its own understanding. The carnal mind only goes by what it sees. In verse 7, again, Romans chapter 8, he goes as far as to say that the carnal mind is enmity or hostile against God. The carnal mind is hostile against God. When we read through the Gospels, you'll see a lot of situations with the Pharisees and the religious leaders, the chief priests, and they're always butting heads, so to speak, with Jesus, because Jesus is sharing these spiritual things and he's exposing them, their hypocrisy and their extortion of the people and how evil and wicked they are. But they were operating under carnal conditions. And that carnal mind is always in opposition to God, always fighting against God. And I'm kind of working backwards here, but verse 6, he said, to be carnally minded is death. But notice what he says about being spiritually minded. He said to be spiritually minded is life and peace. And that's something, it's something we can all relate to, is when we know we should look to God in a situation and we don't. And what's it bring about? It brings about stress. And he said it brings about death, and it does. But our lives become so much worse when we're leaving God out of it. But what happens when we include God in the equation? We have what? We have life and we have peace. It's something that we all long for when we don't have it, is that peace of mind. Where we could be in a crazy situation, but when we know that God is with us, we know that he's walking with us, and we're walking with him, we can be at peace. Perfect peace have they whose minds are stayed on you, on God. We have peace. We can be in the storm. We can be in just a crazy situation. But knowing that God is with us, we can rest and relax. Now I want to go with these thoughts in mind about the carnal mind and the spiritual mind. And I know I didn't go really in depth, but I want to take that into Mark chapter 5. Jesus had just healed the woman with the issue of blood. And if you're familiar with the story, and at the beginning of this account, this man named Jairus, he was a ruler of the synagogue. He was a Jewish man. He was a leader among the Jews. And his daughter was dying, very ill. And he goes to Jesus and he basically begs him to come heal his daughter because she was dying. And Jesus went with him. He was following him. They were going to heal Jairus. Jesus was going to heal Jairus' daughter. Well, while they were on the way, the woman with the issue of blood, she said within herself, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, I know that I will be made whole. And that's exactly what happened. She was healed. The issue of her blood had dried up. And Jesus said, who touched me? And power went out from him. She testified, and she said exactly what had been going on. She had this issue of blood for 12 years, and in a moment, Jesus healed her. And Jesus said to this woman that her faith has made her whole. And that brings us to verse 35. And some of this is an overlap from last week. It said, while he was still speaking, verse 35, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" Now Jesus was already on his way to heal his sick daughter. It showed his intention to heal her, just the fact that he was traveling with him to go to his house. It was at least implied that that's what he was going to do. That's what Jesus's intention was to heal his daughter. But enter in this negative news. Your daughter's dead. And it wasn't just the report, your daughter's dead, but he added to it, why trouble the master any further? Trying to discourage him from pursuing Christ and what Jesus has to offer. You know, and as we shared last week, these are the moments where we're up against the wall, so to speak, and we're at a point of decision. Do we listen to the negative reports? Do we listen to the discouragement? It's all done, it's over with, there's nothing you can do, too much time has passed, or it's finalized. There's no reason to trouble Jesus about this anymore. Or do we say, I'm disregarding what my eyes see, what my ears hear, and I'm going to look to Jesus? And that's when things begin to happen. We don't allow the carnal mind, the natural tendencies to take over, but we disregard those things and we allow faith to win, and we call upon the name of the Lord, and we see miracles take place. And it's not just some positive thing we just we work ourselves up. It's we know who we believe in. We know him. We've experienced him. He's answered our prayers. And we know if he's done it, if he did it back then he'll do it now. Jesus Christ the same yesterday and today and forever. So now he had a choice. Does he rely on the evil advice, or does he look to Jesus? The report itself, the report of her death, that was factual. That wasn't evil. But it was what followed. Why trouble the master? In other words, you're just wasting your time. Well, you're never wasting your time when you go to Jesus. Ever. Verse 36. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." Don't be afraid at this evil report. Don't be afraid of what has taken place. See, Jesus had already shown his intentions on healing his daughter by going with him. He was saying, don't be afraid, only believe. What was he telling? He was telling him to trust in him. Trust in Jesus. Don't believe the negative reports. Don't trust the carnal mind. And time again, we're going to be faced, maybe not with this exact same situation, but we're going to be faced with the same things. And whether they're small or great, we're going to be tested continually. And our faith is going to be tested. It's going to be tried. And sometimes we're going to face the same thing over and over until we learn the lesson that God's trying to teach us. And you know, admittedly, God has to take me through some of the same lessons over and over and over again. And I'm thinking, okay, God, you've been there last time. What about this time? You know what I'm saying? And if we just, and he just takes care of us. But that's how it works, is we go through these lessons, and once we pass, so to speak, the lesson, we graduate, if you will, of this lesson, and we've learned faith. There's going to be another area where we're going to be tested, and God's just going to keep working on us. But we have to trust in him. Let's continue on here in verse 37. It says, he allowed no one to follow him. So this is right after Jesus told the man, have faith, don't fear, only believe. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, why are you making such a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the father's child and the mother and those that were with him and went in where the child was. And we'll stop here for a moment. In verse 37, a couple things I want to point out. Verse 37, it says he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John. And then in verse 40, it says that they laughed at him, but he put them all outside. So he only allowed a few people to come. So initially, he only took 3 of the 12 disciples. And then when they got there, he put everyone outside. Now, it doesn't explicitly say why, but if I may, I believe that he was putting out any sources of doubt. He didn't want any more negative influence on this man, Jairus. He said, don't fear, only believe. He's separating him. Again, I believe, from any sources of doubt. By putting the people out, he's putting out the doubt. Anyone who could bring their carnal thinking into that man's mind, trying to get him to doubt what Jesus can do. Instead, he brought in perhaps some encouragement, some encouragers, Peter, James, and John. And those 3, we see them at different times. They were with Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus showed them his glory. They were with him in the Garden of Gethsemane. They were with him at other places. There were times, yes, those 3 men failed, but they were also men of faith. It was Peter that walked on the water to go to Jesus. These were men of faith. And I'm not saying the other disciples didn't have any faith, but we did see different times, like Thomas, who was doubting, unless I see, I won't believe. He's separating them. And as it applies to our lives, sometimes we have to separate ourselves from these voices. Sometimes we can call the wrong people, looking for encouragement, but it only feeds negativity. It only feeds doubt. Or I just use that as an example, or we could, go to YouTube, or you go to a website and try to get encouragement, and only to be sapped of your faith. We need to go to encouragers. We need to go to people who are filled with faith. People who say, don't worry about that. Don't look at your circumstance. Look at Jesus. He is the one that's going to deliver. He's the one that's going to help you. He's the one that's going to show up right on time. It may seem like it's too late, but it's never too late with God. Amen. He put them outside. Took the fathers, this is verse 40, took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. That's an Aramaic phrase, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. You see, that man had faith. He didn't just give up when he heard the negative news, the discouragement. Jesus was right there encouraging him, putting out the negativity, and then he was able to do this great and mighty miracle, mighty work. And that brings us right into chapter 6. Again, dealing with this carnal mind. It's a different situation, but some of the same principles apply. I want to go right into chapter 6, Mark chapter 6. It says he went away from there and came to his hometown. And his disciples followed him. I feel like I didn't really give that last. He raised her from the dead. Like, they were filled with amazement, so I just feel like I breezed past that. That's like a huge. Imagine how excited you would be. Anyway, let's continue. All right, he went away from there to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished, saying, where did this man get these things? So he's teaching, he goes back to his hometown, Nazareth, where he was raised up. And he goes into the synagogue, and that was their place of worship on the Sabbath day, which would have been a Saturday. And he began to teach. And many who heard him, read this again, were astonished, saying, where did this man get these things? What is this wisdom given to him? And how are such mighty works done by his hands? Now enters the carnal mind in verse 3. So notice, Jesus is teaching these things. We don't know exactly what he was saying, but to the point where they were astonished. He didn't go to the school of the Pharisees, but where did he get these things? Notice what they say in verse 3. Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not all his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Notice their thinking. Notice the carnal mind. Their mind didn't look at the amazement of all of his miracles. Doesn't this show us that this is the Christ? Isn't he different? Opening the blinded eyes, raising people from the dead, forgiving sins, feeding the multitudes with just a few loaves and fishes, doing all of these amazing things, and yet their mind went to the carnal. Isn't he just a carpenter? Don't we know his parents? Isn't he the carpenter's son? Joseph and Mary? Aren't his brothers? He's looking at his natural pedigree, or maybe that's the wrong word, but his siblings and his family, his physical, earthly family. And instead of switching that around and saying, he's not just a man. This is someone greater than just a man. He's not just a prophet. This is God in the flesh. This is who Moses and all the prophets have told us about for centuries before. That this is the one that was to come, the great I am, the one, the Emmanuel, God in the flesh. This is the one that we were looking for, that was going to set up his kingdom on the earth and put all other kingdoms down, and he was going to reign forever and ever. It's the one that Micah was talking about, who was from everlasting to everlasting, or that was to be, that his kingdom was to be for everlasting. Instead, they just saw what they saw. It was the carnal mind. I got to figure it out. And what happened? When the carnal mind took over, they took offense. They couldn't see. They were blinded. And it's not like the carnal mind, spiritual mind. It's not like some outside force that we have no control over. All of us are capable of exercising faith. And that's the wonderful thing. That it's not just, I guess I was born with a carnal mind, and I was born with a spiritual mind, so I believe. And no, it's we have been given, God has designed us to have free will, to the capacity to believe the simplicity of the gospel. But it shows that they were seeing him through this carnal lens. Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown and among his relatives, and in his own household. Now notice what it says. And he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid a few hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. Why couldn't Jesus do great and mighty works in his hometown? Because there was a lack of faith. Contrariwise, when there's an abundance of faith, there's many mighty works. God is not limited in this world, but and I want to be careful how I phrase this, he limits himself and the work that he does in people's lives based on their faith. How many times has he said, be healed according to your faith? According to your faith, so be it unto you. And the wonderful thing is, it doesn't take a mountain size of faith. It's just a little bit of real, genuine faith. And we experience the great, wonderful miracles of God and what he does in our lives. And so as we wrap up today, we all face different situations. We all face challenges in our own lives. And what are the barriers that are in place? Is it our own natural thinking? Most of the time, I would say it is. That we're hindered from growing because we can't get past what we see. We can't get past our past sometimes. Sometimes we're hindered, for example, forgiveness. Now, we were all born into sin. We've all failed. And if we all knew everything about each other, we probably wouldn't be in the same room here. Like, what? They did what? But God is a forgiving God. And I want to emphasize that it just takes a little bit of genuine faith and for him to change everything around. We can forgive ourselves, we can forgive others, and we can go on the offense and go into this. The Bible said, Jesus said, to go into all the world and preach the gospel. He didn't say go into all the world and condemn everyone for every little sin that they've done. The gospel is good news that Jesus is alive. Let's pray.